One of the biggest lessons I've learned from nature is to feel safe and okay in the unknown. And I think in our modern world, so much of society is geared towards trying to control nature, trying to control our lives. But in the end, we really can't. There's some things we just can't control. And being out in nature has taught me to be at home in the unknown. And as an entrepreneur, I don't know if there's any more valuable skill than to be at home in the unknown, because as you know, there's always unknown in entrepreneurship. That's by definition what it's all about. Yes, there's a risk. And of course, it's important to be smart and not take risks, like to know what risks we're taking and prepare for them. But to not let that deter us from living has been such a deep message for me.
Awesome. I'm here with Michael Fenchel, co-founder of Breathe for Change. It's awesome to have you here today, Michael.
Thanks, John. Excited to be here.
Yes. So you're co-founder of Breathe for Change, but you're also straddling some other positions as well. Maybe we could start with a quick introduction on who you are and what you're building and go from there.
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name is Michael Fenchel. I'm an entrepreneur and a wellness geek and consciousness artist. I think of myself, which what I mean by that is I'm fascinated by human consciousness and how it works and how we can learn from nature, learn from some of the more esoteric traditions about how to approach our entrepreneurship and our lives within this society and this world.
That's super cool, very relevant. I also think when I get into thinking about wellness as well, it's sort of like this idea of mind body connection and sort of your awareness around it. So I think about consciousness a lot as well. Maybe we can start off with your business experience, and then I'd love to get into the esoteric practices. What is Breathe for Change, and how did it come to be?
Sure. So Breathe for Change is a movement to enhance the health and well-being of educators first and foremost, and then also students and entire communities. It came to be through a collaboration between myself and co-founder Dr. Ilana Nankin. Her story is really the original genesis in that she was a school teacher, experienced the stress and burnout that's endemic in the industry, got her PhD in education, and found that the same stress and burnout she had as an educator also was being experienced by so many other educators. And that's where I came. So she wanted to do something about this, started getting this idea, and we joined forces, created the world's only yoga teacher training, like certifying instructors people as yoga instructors, specifically designed for educators. And then also we support those educators in going into the classroom, helping students with their social and emotional learning, their well-being in general. So I'm really proud to say we just certified our 10,000th educator and have now reached more than 5 million students with our practices. So it's been a pretty awesome ride to be part of.
That's so awesome and so needed. How did it come to be? Like when you looked at the market and the space, how did you decide to go build that out?
So it's a great question. And I think it's a great segue also into kind of the topic that I want to get deeper into today, which is how to approach entrepreneurship from a deeply embodied and connected and space of well-being. Because honestly, the way Breathe for Change came to being had nothing to do with looking at the market or trying to find a business opportunity. And it had everything to do with Ilana and myself and a small handful of other people really asking, what does the world really need right now? And what are we passionate about? How can we take the lived experiences that we've had, Ilana as an educator, myself as an entrepreneur, bring those together and offer something of value to the world? So the truth is, it was very organic, and it was us showing up every day asking, how can we make the world a better place? How can we do something that actually has a real impact on human well-being? And kind of following following the thread, like starting, putting out something, seeing what really worked and what didn't, and really staying focused on that deeper level of being of service more so than trying to figure out how to start a company.
So entrepreneurship or leadership from an embodied place, or maybe even, showing up at your job from that space. What does that mean to you, and how can we get there?
To me, embodied leadership means connecting with what really matters to each of us and living it. another way of saying practicing what we preach, or, as Gandhi would say, be the change you wish to see in the world. To me, what embodied leadership means is, I think as entrepreneurs and leaders, most of us are driven by seeing something better in the world. Maybe it's we want better technology to solve some, problem that individuals or society is facing. Maybe we really care about people having more physical well-being and health. Maybe we care about mental wellness. Whatever it is that we care about having an impact on in the world, I think embodied leadership means doing it first for ourselves, starting first from within. If we want to help others be physically healthy, well, first let's get ourselves physically healthy. And if we want others to be, in the case of Breathe for Change, mentally and emotionally healthy, let's get ourselves mentally and emotionally healthy. Let's consider, what does it even mean to have a team, a startup that is supporting people's mental and emotional well-being, so that when we then offer our products, it's coming from an integrated, embodied place, and we can actually innovate in ways that most others have not. And that's the deeper journey of Breathe for Change. And from the start, Ilana and I have always taken that approach.
Mm.
We've always said, "Hey, let's hold one another to be our best selves and embody, the well-being as best as we can. And let's just experiment. How's that going to help us actually grow something in the world?"
And as part of that, or as a separate venture with your partner, you also kind of do this for teams, is my understanding. So let's pretend I was a client. Could we do a little bit of a practice as to like the types of questions that you're asking founders, team members, leaders of teams, in order for them to kind of connect to this, and then be able to leverage it in order to grow and be a more impactful business?
Absolutely. If you're willing to get a little vulnerable, you bet.
Okay, great. Let's do
So,
it. Why not?
what do you really care? Like, if you really tap into the why behind, what you're doing with June and or with this podcast, with the whole thing, like what really drives you? What do you deeply care about
Mm.
through this work?
I've struggled with my health. I've struggled with my mental health. I've had times where I didn't feel good in my body, where I didn't feel good in my mind. Might sound a little esoteric, but I last night I was doing some yoga and I was like, wow, like yoga actually makes me feel more at home in my body and my mind. And that practice of coming back home to your body or your mind and feeling comfortable in your own skin, feeling comfortable in your own mind, that is an ever ending journey. I've been on it for, 10 plus years, 15 years, and it only finally feels like I'm putting the pieces together, because in a given time, you can only focus on one part of wellness, or different parts of wellness. And then you start to understand that you have these different tools and you can kind of bring them together in this unique fashion in order to feel better, for more sustainably. Um, and if that was difficult for me in terms of, where I've been brought up, everything I've been fortunate and lucky to have and be given, I wonder how it is for others. And I know it's difficult for others. It's one of the most difficult things. All of us want to be healthy to a certain extent. All of us want to be around for a long time, usually, to spend as much quality time we can in this world with our loved ones. So a lot of my why comes to, how do we make those practices, the products, the services, the things that can help us be better every day? How do we make those things more accessible, more affordable? Um, so yeah, I probably rambled a little bit, but that's
Yeah.
that's a
No,
little
it's
bit.
perfect. So what I'm hearing is that what really deeply your why, what really deeply motivates you is both your own story of, struggling, as we all do, I think, to find real well-being for yourself, and then also an awareness of all the privileges, fortunes you've had to be able to get here, and wanting to make that more accessible to more others, which is beautiful. So the next place I would probably go, if you were a client, would be to ask, you know, as you think about how your company culture and how you interact with the others at June,
Mm.
are there areas, I would be curious both about the areas you feel like that is really coming to life within your team, and then also areas where you feel like there's opportunities to bring that even more into the experiences of the members of your team?
Mm, yeah, that's a great question. So I think, we're a focused company, and we're also, our product is wellness focused, but something that is at the core of the product is that we believe that wellness isn't one size fits all, and we're all kind of dealing with different things at different times. And the idea of even wellness shows up differently in different people's lives. Um, so that product philosophy has also found its way into sort of our culture, where not everyone needs to do breath work every day or get in a sauna every day in order to uh, be well and feel well. It kind of depends on their own goals and aspirations and their own why. So we try not to really force it on folks on the team. There's people on our team that are more into it kind of naturally, and there's people on our team that maybe it shows up a little bit differently. So it's yeah, it's we're at the early innings of that journey, but it's like creating optionality, creating different choices, but then also understanding that for sometimes, just grabbing a beer at a bar and just having a conversation is a way for the team to connect and learn about each other.
Well, beautiful. And I think so. I would say, from my perspective, you're pretty far along the curve of the way that most entrepreneurs are approaching this, in the sense that from what I can hear, you're very intentional and conscious about how do you cultivate well-being within your team and culture, and inclusion being a key pillar of that, right? Because I do think a lot of the times those of us who get, really into mind body wellness, or all these other, whether it's cold plunges, saunas, red light, whatever, you name it, can think that it's because it's so valuable for us, or in your case for you, it might be a natural inclination to want to like really push other people to have the same experience. What I'm hearing is
Yeah, I
that
had a
your
for
definition.
example, and sorry to interrupt, I had a founder on the podcast that's like, I tried psychedelics, it had a positive impact on me. Everyone on my team should try psychedelics. Um,
Yeah, that's
and
a strong statement.
very, very, and I don't know if that really I've seen on our own team that doesn't really jive with everyone.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, meeting people where they're
Yeah, I
at.
mean, we work. I think inclusion and accessibility of wellness is a core thing that I've had to learn, and I think it's a part of becoming more humble as a leader as well, to recognize that leadership and whatever our own experiences are don't necessarily apply to everybody else, but it's instead, how do we create spaces where the people who are on our team can be encouraged to explore what well-being looks for them, and have support in that, without it being a one size fits all. So I really love that, and I totally hear you. We work with you know several clients. One of them's about a 250-person company engineering team, and when we first started working with them, we had a bias towards social and emotional connection and trust building and communication, looking like an extrovert's perspective. Whereas many of the people on the team actually feel more connected with different ways of expressing themselves. And so it's been, in our journey and this is where it's really not a one size fits all when it comes to wellness within teams and within cultures. Um, so
Yeah,
I'd
and
say
maybe to riff off that for a sec, Michael, like something I think is sort of missing. Although again, we're early, we're a small team, and something I'd like that has added value, and even in context of like being with family at a dinner table or being with friends, like I like having some level of sometimes structured, deeper questions in order to get people to sort of be vulnerable and share, because I think that
Mhm.
creates deeper connection. And I'm careful around how to bring that to team environment too, because for some people it could be like, oh, like you're asking me such a deep question and doing it. And on the other hand, it can help people feel heard, because with some level of more organized conversation or flow, you can make sure that everyone is heard rather than just the opinion or the feelings of a few, and kind of go from the surface level deeper. And it seems like that's maybe some of what y'all do as well.
100%. We think of it as the container, or the cultural container, essentially like the strength of psychological safety and trust that's in the space. And it's really important for those deeper dialogues to scaffold, to start with. lighter, easier, and more accessible things. And um, like we, for example, we run a lot of in-person retreats that are like 2 days, and we do it sometimes just for entrepreneurs from different teams, but we also do it for teams. And this is always one of the biggest hesitations for any client is like a leader being like, well, is my team going to feel comfortable? Is this going to be weird? Is this going to take people, into their panic zone or cause people to shut down? And we found that over and over again, when when it's approached as a permission based thing, meaning people get to opt into the activities and experiences, and when it's really thoughtfully done, we've seen transformations. People on the other side coming out feeling more connected, more inspired about work than they've ever felt in their life after literally 2 days of just what you're saying, really opening up deeper spaces for more vulnerability and flow. And I think it's a really, tangible, practical skill for a leader and an entrepreneur these days to be able to facilitate more connection, more engagement between team members to keep people,
Mm.
inspired and working their best. Because that's another aspect of well-being, social well-being or also vocational well-being, but the well-being of feeling purpose and motivation and real drive about work. And I think that's something that, another component of the vision that I have, and we have for what wellness looks like within an organization.
Can you give me some more examples of those like deeper, thoughtful questions that you've had success with, whether it's in a work environment or whether it's even through friends? Because sometimes I personally struggle where I'm like, I don't know if I want to push this person to get deep when they're not ready for it. But at the same time, then you can kind of sometimes sit around the dinner table or sit around somewhere and just be like, why are we even, what why not use this opportunity to learn a little bit more about each other, be a little bit more curious about each other?
Yeah, we've actually published on our site. I can share the link, a list of about 100 prompts
Oh
for
yeah.
various levels of what we call spiciness. So there's like mild, medium, and spicy prompts. But
Okay.
yeah, so happy to send the link to that you can always share with folks. But something that comes to mind actually is one really great prompt is share about a moment or an experience that shaped who you are today. People can go really deep with that or pretty light. And it's a great chance to really, get a little vulnerable and meet people where they're at. Another really cool structure, especially since you mentioned dinner table, is this process that I've heard we call seven toasts. But if you're getting together for dinner, at the start of the dinner, introducing a prompt such as, share a story about an experience that shaped who you are today. And then throughout the course of the dinner, whenever each person wants, they make a toast, they clink their glass or whatever, and they share their story. And it's just a go at your own pace thing whenever someone is feeling it's really cool because organically throughout the conversation, it kind of just happens. We just did this on our team retreat 2 days ago, and it was phenomenal. And then the one little twist you can do is to make sure that people are kind of going is you can have so that the last person has to sing. And so everybody's like, I don't want to be the last person. I don't want to be the last person. Except usually maybe there's one person who has a great voice in the group who's like, yeah, I'll be the last person. So fun little
Yeah.
simple thing like that, right? Where it's like fun and playful, but it can also be deep. Yeah, it can be super valuable.
So maybe we can go now a little bit deeper into your story, Michael. What is one experience that has really shaped who you are today? And
Wow, I like how you did that. That was a good one. Yeah, there's so many. I will tell a story about when my dad passed away, because that was one of the biggest turning points in my life, I would say. So I was 25. I had been kind of wishy-washy in my entrepreneurship. I knew I had tried starting things, but I would essentially like run up against the wall of it being hard and look for other things. I was like having a really hard time. And my dad died suddenly of a heart attack. And it really like smacked me in the face with how precious life is and how I want to make the most of this experience. And before that, I had been dabbling with some of the more esoteric side of things, such as,
Michael,
did
can
I
you?
lose you, John?
I did. Can you
Yeah.
go back for a
Okay.
sec, just in
Yeah.
case we lost that part on my side?
Yeah. I gotcha. Yeah. So the story I want to share is how actually my dad's death from a heart attack led me into the journey of wellness entrepreneurship that I've been doing since then. So I was about 25. Before that, I had been trying to start companies and failing. And a lot of it was, and at the same time, I had been doing yoga. I had been dabbling in the more esoteric side of psychedelics and meditation and breath work. And I hadn't merged the two worlds. I was approaching entrepreneurship in kind of the standard, prescribed way. And when my dad died, I realized how precious life is and how much I wanted to make the most of it. And it gave I thankfully came out of that feeling conviction that no matter what happened, I wanted to merge those worlds. I really wanted to put what my deeper beliefs into practice and see what happened, even if it didn't go the way I wanted. And so thankfully, right around that time, I also got connected with this incredible wisdom keeper of Mayan and Native American traditions, who was living about an hour and a half away from where I was in Wisconsin. And I started going to see her first to help me get over help me cope with and heal from the sudden loss of my dad. But through working with her, I started to really gain an appreciation of how nature can teach us harmony, how nature can teach us both to live ourselves fully, but also to recognize our limits and where we need to rely on others. And I started putting into practice what I learned with her, with this wisdom keeper, into my entrepreneurship. And I saw an incredible inflection point where the projects that I had tried to start before then all failed, and the projects I've started since then, there's 5 of them. All of them are still around today. And it was this moment of loss that caused me to look inward and
Mm,
find more deeply what I really care about. And then that was coupled with this gift of finding this woman who had such deep wisdom that I could integrate into my own life and set me on the path that I'm on today.
mm. How how has nature taught you that more practically? How has nature taught you how to be in the entrepreneurial world?
Yeah. It's an exploration and a question I still ask myself, but I'll give it my best shot.
Sure.
So first of all, well, and I'll share more about, I go out into nature by myself for 6 days and nights once a year these days, out in the desert in New Mexico,
In
in
one
a sacred practice called,
window?
yeah, like a 6 day and
Yeah.
night period. On a vision quest is what it's guided by, this actually a different wisdom keeper, but this incredible grandmother of what are known as the teachings of the Delicate Lodge. They're ancient indigenous practices. And so I'll talk more about that later, but I just wanted to name like this understanding that nature has a lot to share, or I believe has a lot to teach us about how we can approach anything in life, including entrepreneurship. Started when I was a kid, but really deepened in my early 20s. And then lately I've been deepening it through that practice. But to get to your question. So in nature, plants and animals have a each each plant or animal, at least to the best that I can understand, is being themselves completely. There's not like there's no like pretense of trying to pretend to be anything that they're not. There's no like a tree. A tree is constantly growing and reaching for the sun, digging its roots down deep into the ground so it's not going to get blown over and pulling nutrients and stuff. And it's just always doing its best. It's not like sometimes being lazy and like it's not like all this other stuff that we do, I think, that like gets in our way, at least to the best of what I can understand, trees aren't doing, right? There's this there's this confidence in who they are,
Mm,
for lack of a better word. And at the same time, though, like there's not an overreaching, there's not this arrogance, there's this humility and this confidence at the same time that I witness in nature. That for me, anyway, has been a big part of my journey. Understanding how to be confident in who I am and be willing to share myself and be vulnerable, but at the same time not compensating and pretending I'm more than I am, or greater than I am, being willing to accept my limitations and also um, help others. That's one example of wisdom that I've really learned from nature, and I consistently strive to keep getting better at and put into practice.
I love that. Can you give us another one? This is good.
Sure. Yeah, sure. um, well, a really simple one is being more in touch with my body.
Mm,
I feel like the natural world is, again, not so heady. Like, it's more instinctual and body based. And so when I approach my days and my work, I really am aware of the state of my body. Like I'm right now, I'm at my standing desk. Because I know for me, if I want to be sharing myself, I'm going to be best, with an open heart, posturally, like standing more straight, and I just have more energy, and I'm using my arms when I talk. All these things I've found are really helpful for me, so I employ them, using my body. Did I lose you, John?
Yeah, you did.
Sorry, I'm gonna go back into it. I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah.
if it's my side, but okay, we're in good territory, so let's do it.
Yeah, let's
So,
keep going.
um,
So
okay,
you're saying another part of the reason you like being in nature is that makes you feel more connected to your body?
yeah, I feel that being in nature, I'm very aware of myself as a physical being. Like on this vision quest, for example, I have very little food, and uh, I'm very aware of my hunger. Also, I recently went on a survival course for 7 days out in Utah, and we were learning to forage for food and build shelter out of just ropes and a poncho. And there was a hailstorm, and I was very aware that like I'm this physical being who, through my hands and the actions I took, was constructing what I needed to live, and it helped me stay very connected to my body. And so then when I approach entrepreneurship, I think about my posture. I think about my state of physical being. I think about, okay, exercising, in the middle of the day for me really helps because I get my morning boost from just having slept well. And then instead of an afternoon lull, I get to the gym or I go play pickleball or whatever it is. And then I'm energized for the rest of my day. If I'm on a podcast, I'm standing up at my standing desk, in a posture that I know helps me be present and excited. So just being aware of the component of how our physical bodies influence the ways that we show up, mentally, is another learning that I've gained through the nature practices.
Very cool. I'm curious to dive a little bit deeper into these vision quests. So, what was your first vision quest like? And how has maybe your familiarity with that experience, because it seems pretty intense, sort of evolved
Yeah.
since? How many times have you done it?
So I've done like a formal guided quest 3 times.
Okay.
I've also done this survival experience one time, and I've done other explorations in nature, with the use of psychedelics or other plant medicines as well. But yeah, just to speak to the vision quest in particular. So my first quest was 3 years ago. Again, I had been doing, before the quests, I was doing like 2 or 3 days at a time with this other wisdom keeper out in nature meditating. So there was a lot of buildup. And I don't necessarily recommend Vision Quest as like the first way that someone explores this. But anyway, my first quest, it was really wild. So going out into the tradition of a quest, it's a rite of passage, right? And I think our culture today has been written about a lot, is lacking a lot of rites of passage that help us go from, adolescence to adulthood, for example, um, and or from, singlehood to union, right? Or whatever the different things are. And so my first quest, I on the way out, this teacher, wisdom keeper, paused me, had me look back. I was walking down into this canyon and these beautiful red rocks, and this huge canyon in New Mexico, and really wild land, like no humans as far as the eye can see. And the teacher had me look back at the path I had come and asked me, "Are you willing to let everything in your life die for the sake of it being reborn?" And I was like, whoa, that's a big question. Am I willing to let it die? Like on a tangible level, obviously, no. Like I don't want to lose, my partnership or things. But what I understood from that question was, am I willing to not be attached to things being the same as they were in the past?
Mm.
Am I willing to let the who I've known, and most importantly, who I've thought of myself as, am I willing to let that die so that I can know myself better? So in the end, I was like, yes, and had this experience of actually a little ceremony to like let that happen, esoterically. Then was guided to my site, got in touch with the land. So for the quest in the tradition that I'm learning, it's about maybe like 100 yards wide circle ish. It's not a perfect circle because it's based on the natural geography, but anyway, and you're in that space the whole time for 6 days and nights, and you get to know it incredibly intimately. And
Oh,
Um,
you don't leave
so
that 100
no,
yards.
you don't leave that space. Yeah, you're like in your home. It's like you make a home out of this place in nature, and you get really familiar with the different boulders, the trees, the animals that visit it, etc. Um, and yeah, it was. I mean, my first one was really intense. I mean, there's
And
mountain
you're there
lion
by
in the area.
yourself.
There's
You saw a
by
mountain
yourself.
lion?
I didn't see a mountain lion. I did see a mountain lion on a different hike, but not in this. I didn't see a mountain lion while on quest. But I'm out by myself with no real backup. No phones, no technology, just me. Um, and so you're very. It's like very vulnerable in that way. And there's something super sacred about that because, at least in my perspective, sacred because there's so many things in our modern life that make life so convenient and so comfortable and so easy, but I think it's easy, it's also at the same time easy to lose ourselves in that. And so it's like Vision Quest is a chance to just let it all fall away and just be with yourself in nature and just experience a clarity. So for me it the journey I went on was in this quest was looking through my life, how it's been up till now, and thinking of life as a river. If I thought of my life as a river, what were the what were the little boulders or trees that had fallen in the river that were blocking the flow of energy? What were the relationships that didn't end in a healthy way, that were still like an eddy stealing from the flow of the river? And essentially going through all of that and clearing them from my own mind, like making peace with them, being grateful for the experiences I have had and learned from. And I came out feeling so. Adriana, my partner, also did a quest at the same time. She was in a totally different area, so I couldn't see or hear her in any way. But when we came out, I'll never forget, it was one of the sweetest moments of my life. We were only about a year into our relationship and we were having some challenges. And I think we were each on our quest. And I think we were both like worried that maybe the other person would like not want to be with us anymore on the other side. Right. And it's like such this raw thing. So at the end of the quest, I'm like walking up with this like leather thing I was working with, like draped over my shoulders. She's walking up. It's like this 30-minute march up, both of us just feeling so raw and clear. And I'll never forget the moment we saw each other because we both just were smiling like ear to ear and just like clearly we're choosing one another. And it was this like pure joy of having let go of so much that often, takes away from the pure emotion of life and just letting it be so raw. So anyway, I got a little sidetracked there, but that's a story that shows the potency of the
Mm.
emotional experience of one of these quests.
How do you, like, do with the risk of it? Like, isn't there a physiological risk to being out there? Like, if a mountain lion did come to that part of the land, like, how would you protect yourself? And why would you, and is it worth that risk for you?
For me, it absolutely is. The first of all, the risk of mountain lions is actually quite low, especially if you know what to do, which is essentially like be large and make noise. They don't generally. It's rare for them to attack adult humans, and it's not impossible. Of course, there is a risk. Um, but for me, the way I think for me, it's 1,000% worth it. This is where it's like each person is unique. But for me, the way I think about risk is like everything. Life is a risk. It's a risk to be alive. It's a risk to drive. It's much more dangerous to drive a car than it is to go out and do this, for example. Like you have a much higher risk of dying from a car than a mountain lion, and I think a car crash. And I feel like our modern society, the way we relate to nature is there's this fear of the wildness of it. There's this, and this is maybe really getting to the heart of why I think these quests are so valuable. I think our modern society, for most of us, at least in the United States, everything is about making barriers between us and wildness, because wildness has danger. And so I think it trains us to be risk averse, to want to always be looking out how to protect ourselves and to be afraid of the unknown, to be afraid of what we can't control. And to me, one of the biggest lessons of quest is to learn to be okay even when I can't control what's going on.
Sorry, I
And as an
lost you there.
entrepreneur, I
You
mean,
said fear of the unknown, and
I'm
I
going to
lost.
say that one more time.
Please,
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry, I'll say that one more time. No. So, one of the biggest lessons I've learned from nature is to feel safe and okay in the unknown. And I think in our modern world, so much of society is geared towards trying to control nature, trying to control our lives. But in the end, we really can't. There's some things we just can't control. And being out in nature has taught me to be at home, to come back to what you're talking about, being at home, to be at home in the unknown. And as an entrepreneur, I don't know if there's any more valuable skill than to be at home in the unknown, because as you know, there's always unknown in entrepreneurship. That's by definition what it's all about. And so this chance to, yes, there's a risk, and of course it's important to be smart and not take risks, like to know what risks we're taking and prepare for them, but to not let that deter us from living has been such a deep message for me.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds like on the most practical level, you're kind of taking some of the lessons that you're learning through your own spiritual practices and reflective practices, and then putting them into these workshops and such, and coaching seminars, leadership seminars, or retreats. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, you're really like getting deep into the nature and doing these vision quests, and working with a wisdom keeper. I'm curious, for folks that may not want to, that want to take it a step further than the workshops and those types of things that you're doing, but are not ready to go on a vision quest for 6 nights. Where would you say are like low hanging fruit in terms of ways that they can learn about this world and start to dabble into it? Is it as simple as like yoga and meditation? What goes from there?
Yeah. So I think yoga and meditation are amazing access points. They're more Eastern, they're more, Asian in descent. Um, for a more direct access point to more like American indigenous practices, I would recommend um, Braiding Sweetgrass is an amazing book. Also, Sacred Instructions by Sherry Mitchell is an amazing book.
Mm,
Learning from indigenous leaders, thinker, who writers or authors or leaders or teachers, I've found, because again, I'd already been doing this type of work for about 10 years before I did a quest. I don't think that's necessary. I think, a year or two could be fine. But so one is seeking out and learning from indigenous, teachers, leaders, authors, wisdom keepers, etc. And and thankfully, more and more of that is more available with a simple Google search. I mentioned two really meaningful books that I've read that have been helpful for me. Um, but I encourage, just researching that. And then, so and I would say, so the reason I'm bringing that up is like I'm not I do guide people in these ways, and I do feel that I have knowledge to share, and I would always encourage people to go and research this type of thing for themselves. But some things that I would recommend include nature walks. So, and what I mean by that is more specifically a practice of going to like a hiking trail, or not a park, like not curated nature, but actually wild nature. So it doesn't have to be, a 5 hour plane ride from where you are, but find some surrounding area, a forest, a woods, whatever it might be, and go on a walk and do nothing else on the walk other than just be present and just be aware of your surroundings. Listen to the sounds, be aware of the sights. Another thing that modern society often does is try to put a lot of things between us and nature as far as touch goes. Like we wear heavy jackets and hats and sunglasses and like boots and stuff that gets in the way of our direct connection with nature. So, I mean, I love to walk barefoot. Call me a hippie. That's okay. I feel like there's a better sensory experience for me when my bare feet are on the ground, because I'm actually feeling the earth. But whatever it is for you, put your hands on a tree. It doesn't matter. Go out on a walk in nature, and let the, like, actually really try to connect to nature with your senses.
mm,
There's actually an amazing study that shows, if for those who really need science to back up why this is important, including me. I'm a physicist actually by original study, but there's a study that shows that our brain releases the neurochemical oxytocin, which is like the bonding chemical or the love drug, some people call it, when we smell soil.
mm.
So literally just smelling the smell of soil or grass. I don't know if anyone's like me, loving the smell of like fresh grass or like the soil, but literally we've evolved. Our brains release the neurochemical oxytocin when we smell soil. And to me, what that means or shows us is that our connection to the earth, our connection to nature is literally part of our physical wiring. So I really encourage, breaking out of these, we live in boxes of homes, we put all this gear on. Try to, take a layer off and go and connect more directly with the natural world.
I love that. How do you balance this like success and growth in the business world that you have, this entrepreneurial bug, with the practices and lessons that you're learning in this like more esoteric world of indigenous culture? Like you would think that maybe someone like you like would potentially just want to go, and instead of spending 6 days or nights, would want to just go all out and just live in nature in a hut and just meditate all day. So
Yeah.
how have you decided to integrate these two worlds? A lot of questions in this, but like, do you start at the beginning of the year and kind of look at the year ahead and say like, I'm gonna schedule um, this weekend and this weekend in, where I'm going to be out in nature? How do you practically integrate those two worlds?
Practically, it's about, so for me, my work will take over my life if I let it, and it did for many years. So for me, it's about scheduling first the non-work stuff. So I'll schedule my vision quests, yes, at the start of the year. I will also, Adriana, my partner, and I set aside a weekend a month where it's just the two of us, just to be present without other plans, uninterrupted, because for the sake of our love, that's really important for us. I generally will take, in addition to a vision quest, 2 to 3 other immersive trainings per year or retreats or whatever they are. So I
Mm.
schedule those up front. Um, and then I also have learned that for me, the morning is like the time for me to be in my more, what I would call like a more sacred practice, or a more the space of the esoteric. So don't I almost never do work meetings or do work before 10:30 in the morning. I've just found that I just block my calendar, and if I do that, then I feel great and ready and motivated and inspired to show up to the rest of my day fully like on. But I
What are
need
you
that
doing?
time.
What are you doing in that time?
So I walk in nature, and I try to be present with, usually sometimes I'll listen to an audiobook, but I'll generally be present with, with the surroundings and just a space of reflection
Mm.
and connection for me. I meditate almost every morning. Over the years, I've put together my own practice. It takes me about 20 minutes to do the general practice I do. There's a little bit of breath work, and then some work with like the energy centers of the body. And then I cold plunge most mornings. And then that usually takes me till about 8 or 8:30. And then from 8:30-ish to 10:30-ish, I journal, I write, I reflect, I do creative. I like whatever I just have that space for me, and it looks a little different at different times, but it's whatever, other than building my businesses, because that again could eat up my entire day. It's essentially whatever else I feel like I want to do, is set aside for that time. And then I also really love your question on a non-practical level. I know it's so helpful to be practical, but I do think that this is a challenge that many people face when they start getting into wellness, is the question you asked, which I thought was super insightful, around why I choose to bridge both of these worlds instead of like just go live in the woods for a month or a year or whatever. Um, and I have done that, by the way. But anyway, the reason I choose to do both is because I ask myself, like, who am I? What's my identity? I'm a white, half Jewish male, and I'm part of this overall experience of society and the identities I hold, the ways I've been conditioned, the privileges I've been given, the skills I have to navigate the systems and structures, the access to capital that I have. To me, I feel like I used to I used to judge that I did those identities and feel guilty for those identities. Um, and I still at times do, but I've learned that I actually am at my best when I embrace those identities and privileges and find a way to serve that takes advantage of them.
Mm.
And so in some ways, I feel like, based on who I am within society, the highest way I can be of service is not to, for example, go be a monk or a shaman or someone who's just only in the world of, or deeply primarily in this more esoteric world, but to be a world bridger, to go deep into that world, but also to, leverage the positions of privilege and opportunity I have to try to create positive change.
Mm. Where do you do your learning? So do you still spend time with, and there's all different types of learning.
Yeah. I I make learning a priority. So if we're talking about those morning times, learning is one of the ways I spend those mornings. So I love to read. Um, I'm pretty voracious with books. I read anything from esoteric books on yoga and, indigenous practices and psychedelics to, practical business books. So that's one thing. But other than that,
What's the best book you read this year, out of curiosity?
best book I read this year, that's a great question. I would say, for me, I would say Sacred Instructions by Sherry Mitchell, the book that I dropped earlier.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's really powerful. It's this incredible woman from the Penobscot nation that lives in the Northeast United States, or yeah, their land is in the Northeast United States, who is also an incredible writer and activist. And she has the book is kind of her view on how we as modern people can help revive and bring to life the wisdom, indigenous wisdom. So it's right up my alley, obviously. So I loved it. But I think she's incredibly articulate, and it's a beautiful book. So I would put that one forward this year.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
I interrupted you. So learning,
Oh,
so
you're good.
obviously books, and then how else do you kind of fit that into your schedule?
Yeah, I seek out opportunities to try things that I haven't done before. So I'm doing a circling workshop, which is a form of authentic relating that I just recently got introduced to in Austin.
What's
It's
that?
essentially it's a dynamic interpersonal meditation practice where it's why I mean I'm pretty new to it. It's wild, but the idea is multiple people come together, and the only sort of like rule, so to speak, is to be as authentic as possible and allow yourself to interact. So people are in their flow. They start expressing they're curious about why someone's body posture is that way. And then that leads someone else to be like, naming that they're attracted to someone else in the space or like whatever. And the whole idea is like just that the group just keeps, you just stay in it as the idea of it. And it leads to a really deep exploration of, how we show up authentically, or how we try to change ourselves to in our relationships. So that's just one example of something that I'm doing soon. But I'm always on the lookout for interesting new experiences. And listen, some of them are one and dones for me. I do it. I'm like, okay, that was interesting. I tried something
What's an
new.
example of
You
that?
know, a one and done. Good question. It's a one and done for me. Um,
'Cause I know pickleball isn't a one and done.
no, pickleball is not a one and done. I've become obsessed with pickleball. I'm playing later today. Um, what is a one and done for me? I mean, I think for me, some of the more businessy seminars are an example of that. Like I feel like, for example, I was, you know, design thinking startup like things or other businessy workshops that I think can be tremendously valuable for many people. For me, if they don't also include like a wellness component, I don't. I have a hard time with them. So that's an example of that for me. I lost you.
Sorry, I lost you. So you're saying design thinking is a one and done? You hit it and quit it?
I think design kind of, yeah. I think it's a great practice. I think I've integrated it, but what I mean is like workshops that are sort of more just purely intellectual about business. I think that's awesome for many people, but for me, I just can't get excited about it. So I've stopped doing that, and I lean on other members of my team, for example, who are really passionate about that type of thing.
Mm. Um,
Yeah.
Michael, it seems like you're like working on yourself in so many different interesting ways. Like where are you still like what's still challenging for you to
Mm.
kind of improve? Like where do you get stuck?
Yeah. Two things come to mind, and they're interrelated. One of the areas that I've been working on for many years, but still feels like I get stuck sometimes, is in owning my identities, as I mentioned, of being a white male who grew up with, privilege, for sure. Not like a trust fund kid who's just going to be taken care of for life or something, but lots of opportunities given to me, and how I really, and then breathe for change. For example, we have a strong focus on social change and social justice. We have from the start, and so I've been in our company is 80% female, and our customers are 95+% female. So it's a very women driven movement, and also strong focus on racial justice. And it's been amazing for me, and I've been really excited to be part of it. And I'm in this exploration of how do I bring forward my authentic stories and experiences without while at the same time making space for more marginalized groups and individuals to have more space.
Mm,
And that is an area that I don't feel stuck per se, but I feel challenged by in a good way. Like I embrace the challenge, but I feel like I'm always working to learn more how to do that.
mm. This has been great, Michael. I want to get into some. I know we've been going for a little bit. I want to get into two things. One, you've mentioned a little bit around. You've kind of like at a high level mentioned psychedelic experiences. I'm curious, sort of how those fit into your life today, and yeah, stop there.
Yeah. Yeah. So a few moments in my life that were really transformational were shaped by psychedelics. And I don't think that my view on psychedelics is that they, I don't think they're necessary. I think that we can access anything I think that they make it easier for us. Well, what they do in many ways is they disable the filtering systems of the brain that normally like filter out information that isn't relevant to us. And so in particular, the reticular activating system, they like knock it out. And so what happens with that is that we take in way more information from our senses reaches our brain.
Mm,
That's a big part of why when we have psychedelic experiences, it's like so potent. But the other thing that does is it lets us see things or experience things that we normally don't experience. My personal perspective on psychedelics is that they let us connect more deeply in many ways with the reality that's here. But I also think that we can access those states through meditation and other forms of experience that like so it's never like we're dependent upon. I personally have never wanted to feel like I'm dependent upon psychedelics to achieve certain states. So anyway, with that background, these days I am always also exploring different forms of psychedelics and which I typically would call like plant medicines, but including microdosing on psilocybin through magic mushrooms, um, ayahuasca experiences within particular group settings where I feel really guided. That's one that I wouldn't do on my own at this stage anyway. Um, and I actually just tried Kambo, which is like frog medicine, but frog poison essentially, which is, which was a really beautiful, powerful experience. Just tried that about 2 weeks ago for the first time and had a really healing, cleansing experience with that. But I aim to do psychedelics maybe once a quarter ish as a way to continue to stay really connected with what is and also enhance neuroplasticity, and be really open minded about life.
do you also schedule that in?
At this stage in my life, I'm around it enough that I don't feel like I have had to schedule it in. I think uh, because many of my friends are also exploring in these ways, like I'm kind of in different communities where that's present. So I feel like it can emerge. But yeah, but I did, I was intentional in finding these spaces because I think for many people, it's like, well, where do I even start? How do I find like in a safe, legal, healthy way, access some of these and and so at first it was talking to the couple friends I had who had done it or who were connected in with these types of practices and learning from them how I could, it's kind of an underground type of thing, I
Mm,
guess. So just at first I felt like I had to be really intentional with it as far as scheduling for it. And now I feel like it's more of a,
It's part of the
I can
community
kind
that
of
you.
like feel when I need it. Yeah. And I also can kind of like feel like, oh, I'm kind of stuck in a rut right now. Like having a little bit of support from
Mm,
psychedelics might help me, see things from a different perspective.
that's interesting. One area that I'm curious to dive into before we wrap up is relationships. You mentioned that your partner is sort of on this path. She did the vision quest. Even the circle thing that you mentioned sort of seems like it could potentially help you in relationship to others in your community. I'm curious, what else? And then you also mentioned the weekend that you two spend every month
Mhm.
together, which
Mhm.
sounded nice. What else have you learned sort of being in partnership and relationship? What types of practices have helped you sort of keep your own, sustain your own identity, all the while sort of forge this new identity in a relationship?
That could definitely be a podcast in its
Okay,
own
yeah,
right.
maybe we'll do a
But I'll
round
do.
two. We'll do a
I'd be happy to, but I'm happy to give, at least something for now.
yeah.
I do. I put a lot of emphasis on love and on partnership. I think more than I think more than the average guy, but it doesn't really matter to compare myself. It's something that to me really matters in life. I feel more inspired and energized when I feel like really loved and loving. And so some of the things that come to mind are making space. First of all, I think I see we and my Adriana and I, we coach couples sometimes. We're starting to do more retreats for couples and focusing on intimacy. And I think many people today in partner and especially in longer term partnerships get into really like rhythms and routines and are just busy and don't make a lot of space to just literally be present with the other person with nothing else
Mm,
planned. And so one of the things, the foundational things for us is always we schedule every week. We have 2 3 hour blocks of time where it's just we call it M&A time for Michael and Adriana. But anyway, we just have this time and we just know coming into that we're just going to be together and whatever we want to do. Sometimes it'll be making love. Sometimes it'll be cuddling up and or going in the hot tub or cuddling up and watching a movie or something. Generally, we don't actually movies aren't normally that time, but like reading books together, whatever it might be and just having that as a kind of a heartbeat or like a pulse for the intimate side of the relationship is super, super valuable. The other plug I want to give actually is this, this, we use this tool on the very first morning of us meeting. And it's called Desires, Fears, and Boundaries. It's a super powerful tool and practice for cultivating connection.
mm,
So the way it works is one person starts, and this deserves a full story, but I won't do it now. But literally at like 7 a.m., I pulled this out with Adriana. She had been visiting San Francisco. I convinced her to let me host her. We hadn't like been physically intimate yet. We had the day before together, and at like 7 a.m., we're drinking our morning bulletproof coffee. And I'm like, hey, do you want to play this communication game? And she's like, sure. And I'm like, it's called Desires, Fears, and Boundaries. And I proceeded to the way it works is one person goes first, and moving into it's like about a situation. So we did it, for example, about this weekend we had together. And I started by sharing my desires. I shared the desire to explore physically with her. I shared the desire to get to know her better. I shared the desire to have fun. Then, after I share my desires, I share each of my fears. So I shared the fear that, you know, I would come on too strong or cross her boundaries or that,
mm,
we would get too attached like too quickly and that, because we were living in different places. So I was vulnerable about like the real fears I had about the situation, which is a key part of this. Then the third step after desires and then fears is boundaries, but boundaries can also be thought of as agreements. And so I shared, my needs for agreement around transparent communication, around really, honoring each of our sovereignty in our lives and really like respecting one another throughout the process. And then so I shared these desires, these fears, and these boundaries. And then basically she's just sitting there like open mouth, like, wow, this is the most vulnerable I've ever seen a guy get within like 24 hours of meeting him before. But it actually opened a space for her so then she goes next. She like reflects back to what she heard from me. Then she shares her desires, she shares her fears, and she shares her agreements, and actually opened up a space for her to cry and release about this fear she had, and get really, really vulnerable. And Anyway, so
So what is
taking
that again?
time
It's
to desires,
fears and boundaries.
fears, and boundaries.
Desires, fears, and boundaries.
And just
I like
literally
that.
taking time to go through those three things. Uh, and the more like masculine partner usually would go first to open up the space, share those three things. And the more feminine energy partner, not necessarily male and female, would generally go next, and then share theirs. And then at the end, it's like this really beautiful, vulnerable. And this is awesome for people just dating, early on. It's also amazing for couples who have been together for decades because it lets it become really present about these core elements. So if I had to say one thing that we use regularly that helps us stay super connected, that's probably it.
That's super cool. I'm gonna try that. Um, Michael, this has been awesome. What would you, is there anything that you'd like to leave us with? And then where can folks learn more about you and what you do?
I think first of all, I want to say thanks to you, John. I really appreciate the questions and having me on. I think it's an awesome endeavor that you're undertaking here and have created to help blend these worlds of wellness and entrepreneurship because I
Thank you.
think they're way too often separated. So I really appreciate that and really appreciate your questions and having me on. Um, I think I just to leave people with, I would say, go for it. I think most people know what they really want and how to be more well than they currently allow themselves to be. So, if anything, I would say if you think that something would be good for you, it probably would, and you might as well give it a shot. You can always, change your mind. So I just say like, go do it, whatever that thing is. Um, and as far as finding me or staying connected, so uh, prdx.co is Paradox's website. Breathe for Change is breatheforchange.com. And then I'm in the process of launching my own site. It should be ready by the time this is released. Fenchel, my last name.com. I'm just going to be sharing about all the stuff that I'm talking about here, the ways that I'm approaching life from different angles, specifically around entrepreneurship and love. So always would love to, have people get in touch. I'm here learning and living just like the rest of us. And the more that great people like yourself, I can have conversations with you or others, it enhances this for everybody. So yeah, I just appreciate it.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your experiences, and excited to play some pickleball in person at some
Let's
point.
do it. Great.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, John.